So then I would like to ask Katie Green from University of York, also on the archaeological topic.
Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me here. I'm the Communications and Access Manager for the Archaeology Data Service in the UK. So what I'm going to try and do is, in a very short period of time, give you a kind of general overview of who the ADS are, what we do, a little bit about how we do it and why we do it. So, first things first, the Archaeology Data Service is a discipline-specific repository. We were established in 1996, so we've been around quite a while. And we're hosted by the University of York. We were initially funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council and JISC, but now we've moved towards a business model which relies on depositor charging. Our remit is to support research, learning and teaching with free, high quality and dependable digital resources. And we do this by preserving data in the long term, promoting and disseminating that data, and providing technical advice to the sector. Over the past 17 years, we've become quite well renowned for our expertise in preserving data. In particular, our guides to good practice. Now, these cover the data management, data creation and preservation of the typical kind of data types that are used in archaeology, but these do get used in a variety of other fields as well, and a lot of the information in there can be taken and being used by different disciplines. Now, one of the reasons why the ADS was set up in 1996 is because generally a lot of the fieldwork methods of archaeology can be destructive. You can't reproduce them, so if you want to test a person's hypotheses, you need to look at the data. You can't go and re-dig an archaeological site. There was also obviously the increase in digital data being used by archaeology in 1996, and there was a recognition of the dangers of data, using digital data, the fragility of digital data. There was also an issue that a lot of the archaeology that happens in the UK is carried out by commercial archaeologists during the planning process. So over 90% of archaeology in the UK, it's probably more like 95 actually, is carried out in the commercial sector. And this kind of excavation, this kind of archaeology doesn't tend to get published in the traditional manner. So a lot of this work was recorded in grey literature and recorded in archives, sat in someone's office, maybe in local government authorities, so you could access it, but you needed to know it was there in the first place, which is obviously difficult. And this, unfortunately, was happening a lot. People would literally put their data on a floppy disk originally, they're moving on to CDs now, and put it with the finds, the archaeological pottery, for example, or the bones, and deposit it with a museum. So obviously 10 years down the line, that's probably not going to be accessible. And again, you don't even know it's there in the first place. So that's kind of one of the motivations of why ADS was set up in the first place. So a little bit about behind the scenes ADS. I'm not going to go into too much detail about how we preserve data, but we use data migration strategies. We obviously have a whole ream of backup and safety storage, and we follow the Open Archival Information System reference model. And here is the obligatory slide of OAIS. I'm obviously not going to talk to you in detail about this. I'm showing you it because one of my colleagues very nicely mapped the ADS staff to the different roles within the model. Do I have a cursor? Yeah. And so you can see here in the centre the core digital archivists. And then you have our developers up at the top here, and myself on the front end as the communications manager. I work with the users of the data. But then at the other end, we have our deputy director, Catherine Hardman, who works with the depositors, so the creators of the data. And there's about 14 of us at ADS at the moment. This is a simplified kind of workflow model of how things happen at ADS. So there's 3 ways in which you can get data into ADS. There's a system called Oasis, which I am not going to cover in detail, but we work with the national bodies, English Heritage, for example, and the Royal Commissions in Wales and Scotland, to get those grey literature reports I mentioned before online and available, and that comes to us through Oasis. It's slightly separate to our main archiving role. And then there is the traditional hard drive in the post kind of method. People, depositors, contact us by email, we have discussions, and eventually they send us the data in some form, which requires our digital archivist to kind of unpack that data. The other method is using ADS Easy. ADS Easy is our online deposit tool. So with this, a depositor can log into ADS Easy, create their project level metadata, upload their files, and create their file level metadata. Now this for us is much simpler because we don't have to start inputting all that file level metadata. So that's a cheaper, more simplified version of getting the data to us. And obviously that is automatically then populated into our collection management system. And that becomes our submission information packages. So that's the various ways in which you can get data to ADS. Once it gets into ADS, we obviously carry out our normal preservation practices. And this is all managed through our collection management system. And then this then becomes, this manages our website, which is where you can access that data. So that becomes a dissemination information package there. And as I said, I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty of the details because you don't need to know that at the moment. You can come and ask me if you want to know anything about that later. As I mentioned, everything is managed by our collection management system. And this is an entirely bespoke system. It's been developed by various of our developers over the years. And it literally records everything from a phone call a depositor might ring up and ask us some advice. So we'll record that in here. We'll record any other projects we're involved in, so maybe European projects. Everything gets recorded within here. Has all our finance details, all our licenses, and it obviously has all the records, the metadata about the archives themselves. And all the preservation processes. So this is an example of a collection, and I don't know how clear it is, and you can see all the different information. You have the coverage there, which is the kind of project level metadata, various relationships to other archives within our system, the accessions, and then the actual files themselves. And this is an example of the preservation processes that have happened to this particular archive. So you can see lots of migration going on here. And that's just a slightly, you can click on the migration or the process, whether it's an editing process or something, find out more information about that. We're quite proud of our collection management system, so that's why I'm showing you it. It also has a DOI module, so we can mint DOIs in there. It has all our metadata is usually using linked data, and I quite like this. This is one of my favourite parts of the recent developments to our system, because being a communications and access manager, I talk a lot about the users, and this helps us map our archives in a way that makes it much more useful for our users at the other end of the scale. So recently we've made all our metadata linked data through the Seneschal Open Vocabularies. They're all heritage data vocabularies, and what we can do is, prior to Seneschal, we did have, even with the best digital archivists in the world, we did still have spelling mistakes. And the main thing was that the concepts that were being used in our metadata were kind of uncoupled from any kind of real meaning. There was a word, but did one person mean the same word as another? And there was no hierarchy. And so when we were providing this to a user, we had to just assume some meanings behind things. With the implementation of Seneschal, the project which created these linked data vocabularies, we literally just type in a word, it brings up a set of thesaurus thesauri. So you can choose monument type. So if you're looking for a monument, archaeological monument, you can start typing something. And in this case, you can start typing farm. You can press on this little information button, which will give you a description of the concept of farm. And if that's the correct concept, you can add it and input it into the metadata. Now, this is something that our digital archivists can do, but so can depositors at the ADS Easy stage. So we know when people are starting to put these terms in that they actually mean the term that they're describing. And you can see there. And this is great for the interface because we use faceted browsing on the interface. So if a user or a depositor says a farm, we can also interpolate from farm all the other parts of the hierarchy surrounding farm. This also means that the linked data that we provide is more meaningful. So rather than providing linked data which has a load of subject terms that are just string literals, we can provide linked data there. So it makes what we provide more meaningful for other people that are using our linked data. And this kind of takes us through to our website and the interface where the hub for our guidance and our archives and accessing our data is. As I said, we do provide a lot of guidelines, so you can access these guidelines through the website. You can also get to ADS Easy through this main homepage, but the archives themselves. One of our other resources is ArcSearch. Now this is an integrated online catalogue with about 1.3 million metadata records in there. Now these metadata records are metadata records for our archives, for our grey literature, for journals, but also metadata records from people like English Heritage, the National Commissions of Wales and Scotland, and their event records of archaeological activity that's happened across the UK. So the website becomes a kind of central hub for searching archaeological activity. And then we have, obviously, the things that we do actually archive. So I mentioned our grey literature reports earlier. We have just under, really, 30,000 grey literature reports at the moment. And this is growing weekly almost. We have about 200 to 300 grey literature reports that go into the archive every month. And it's obviously much better than the previous way of accessing grey literature through trying to find out what existed, then talking to someone and then trying to go to an office and things like that. We also archive journals, so we have about 10,000 different articles that we archive, some specialist bibliographies, some theses, and of course the data-rich archives. These can range from university-led projects with maybe just a couple of hundred files to huge infrastructure programs like the Channel Tunnel Rail Link here, which has tens of thousands of files in it. So those 600 archives can be varying in sizes. The data within those varies vastly. So we have simple, normal excavation images. We have lots and lots of images of dirt, unfortunately, and sometimes not much information about the dirt. We have lots of images of diggers as well, and buildings from building conservation and things like that. We also have, obviously, aerial imagery. And then we have, obviously, the text documents, the reports, the publications, moving through to spreadsheets, databases, whether that's statistical analysis or scientific analysis or just a finds database, through to things like CAD drawings of buildings and excavations, GIS, geophysics in its processed and unprocessed forms, radar, whether that's ground penetrating radar or LiDAR, other forms of laser scanning, virtual reality models, videos, audio, so any kind of data type that you would imagine being used in archaeology, we do archive. And we make that accessible. Each archive has an area within the website, so this is an introduction page on the left here, which tells you a little bit about the archive itself. Then you have the actual downloads. We provide the downloads in non-proprietary formats wherever possible. And it's literally, you just click on the link and you download them. So you can see here, there's a whole ream of CSV files for a database there. We also occasionally create interactive interfaces. So we may have a depositor that comes to us with an archive where a simple download is possible, but to actually, for a user to get the most benefit out of it, they may feel that they'd rather create some sort of search query within the website, whether that be just a search boxes or a map interface or something like that. So we do offer other ways of interacting with data as well as just those simple downloads. They're all available under the ADS terms and conditions. These are similar to a CC BY license. The terms and conditions have been around since 1996, so that's why we don't have a CC license at the moment. The only difference between a CC BY license is that you can't sell the data. This is different to a non-commercial clause because you can use the data in commercial archaeology, for example. You just can't repackage it up and try and sell it again. And we have had instances of that, so if you want to ask me about them, you can later. Obviously, to make our data more accessible, more reusable, we have DOIs for each collection. About 44% of the use of ADS is by academic researchers or for teaching. So good citation practices are essential. So obviously, we implemented DOIs very early. We also have ORCID identifiers. Oh, that's a DOI example of how to cite the archive using a DOI. But we also have ORCID identifiers, so if we have a depositor with an ORCID identifier, we will obviously use that. And we're also exploring granularity within DOIs. So not just having a DOI for the whole collection, having a DOI for individual files. This means that if a depositor has a particularly important piece of data that they think is integral to their hypotheses, they can give that piece of data a DOI, which means you can link directly to that piece rather than trying to find that important piece of data within a collection as a whole. We work quite closely with our sister service, Internet Archaeology. Now, Internet Archaeology is an online peer-reviewed journal. It's open access. It was again established at the same time as ADS in 1996. And one of the great things about Internet Archaeology is a purely online journal. And this means that if you are creating a particular data type, this is an example of some virtual reality walkthrough models. And part of this article that these examples are from, they were using the models to kind of show how people would move through an archaeological space. If that was published in a traditional print format, you would have a static image of that. Whereas in this case, in Internet Archaeology, because it's online, you can actually follow those models, you can explore them online. We're also working with linking online publications to data directly. And again, we can do this with other journals, but we do work closely with Internet Archaeology. And Internet Archaeology also works with other archives. But this is an example of an article here about the Silchester, the Roman town of Silchester in the UK. And the article's been published in Internet Archaeology, but the data has been deposited with ADS. So one of the great things that means we can do is the author of the article can discuss certain parts of this particular building. And you can see here, they're talking about post holes to do with the building. And they refer to a context number. You can see what I'm referring to here. There you go, a context number. Now, in a traditional publication, you'd refer to that context number. You may have an appendix at the back where you can go and look up that context number. But with our work with Internet Archaeology, you can literally click on that context number and see the context record within our archive. So we're trying to work with this and do more of this to get that data much more accessible, much more out there. Internet Archaeology is also being publishing data papers. Which are obviously you probably already aware, but short articles that cover the data the methodologies of the data, and in particular, Internet Archaeology focuses on the value of the reuse of that data. So one of the unique things that Internet Archaeology offers is it offers an open referee statement, and this referee statement is peer reviewing the data itself. So they'll discuss the data, they'll talk about how well constructed the data is, and then also how it could be reused in the future. So we know that our data is being reused at the ADS website, and the traffic to the ADS website is growing year on year. But obviously it's quite difficult, as Jane mentioned yesterday, to convert the usage statistics into actual reuse stories. So we know that people are downloading the data, but what are they doing with it? It's a bit hard to find, really. We have to literally look for it and look for these reuse examples. We do know from analysis of our registered users that, as I mentioned before, that the vast majority of the data on the website is used for academic research and teaching and learning. But this is starting to change a little bit with the commercial research and the heritage management sections growing. So every year these two areas grow and grow, which is great for us because it means that much more commercial research is accessing the academic research, and the academic research is probably accessing the commercial research, so they're talking to each other a lot more than they would have done in the past. So we do have some great examples of reuse. Kevin mentioned the correlating radiocarbon dating and collagen degradation project in his presentation yesterday, which is where paleontologists use archaeological data and found some really interesting things. We also at the moment have a Roman rural settlement project, which is also known as the Roman Grey Literature Project, because what they're doing in this project is they're taking all the grey literature that I talked about, those 30,000 reports and more, and they're literally taking everything that's referred to in those reports, so finds, buildings, and they're creating a huge database. They're focusing particularly on rural artefacts and things like that, but then they're able to map through the locations of these reports and what they'd excavated, trends within the kind of the artefacts in different areas across Britain. So in the past, you'd have to literally search through all these reports. They're creating this massive database, which is going to be great, and it should be out, I think, in maybe April next year, if anyone's interested. This was also mentioned yesterday. So we know that the data is being reused. We have some really good examples of reuse studies. And JISC commissioned an impact study in 2013. It was published, I think. And what it found was that economically, the value of ADS is huge to the sector. By providing all this data online, stopping people having to travel and search for data, making it much more easily accessible, we provide, for every £1 invested in ADS, we provide up to £8.30 return. This is over 30 years. So economically, we are providing a great service. So archive, this is a really good example of why you should archive data or why people should share data. And we're obviously moving we're moving far away from this. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie. Are there any questions? Yeah.
Instead of your talk, you briefly mentioned the dangers of digital data.
Yes.
Could you specify what
Well, obviously, putting your data on a CD and then putting that CD in a museum and then trying to access that CD in 10, 15 years' time where it may have degraded and you can't. Those kind of things. The obsolescence of software. Archaeology uses so many different types of software and it comes and goes so fast. We have an archive that was deposited with us in the late 90s, and we can't access a lot of the data on it because the software's so obsolete. We just can't get to it, that kind of thing.
Any more questions? I have a question.
Yeah.
Did I understand it right that you said that nowadays you are supported only by your own business model?
For the archiving, yes. We have 14 members of staff, so that doesn't cover all 14 members of staff. But we are involved in a lot of like European project funding, for example. And that allows us to carry on our development side of things. So we're working with the Ariadne project, for example, that allows us to explore natural language processing. So we do get funding from various other things. We also have a relationship with the English Heritage, as I mentioned before, and the Royal Commissions for Arc Search. So they fund certain things. But the actual archiving is funded by the depositors.
And how does it work, for example, for if there's a new university excavation project? Is there from the funding agency kind of pressure or policy that they have to join, and do they provide money into the research project which may be then transferred?
They do, yeah. Most of the research councils in the UK say you have to deposit your data. We work with the Arts and Humanities Research Council and NERC, and for archaeology we are the recommended archive. And for that, then if you were an archaeology academic, you would write into your proposal that you were going to deposit, and that the deposit process will cost this much money. Not just the deposit either. We always recommend that you cost for our services, but also the preparation of that data as well. So yeah, the funding body would then fund that part.
So we discussed yesterday the question, how do you, let's say, motivate the researchers to provide the data to the archives? But this is then already implemented by the Research Council, which you have to do it.
Yes.
I think that's brilliant.
Doesn't mean that it necessarily happens to chase people down.
Here it's brilliant.
Yeah.
So maybe the higher chance if you do not have such a policy.
Yeah.
Is part of your business model also to acquire and operate the infrastructure, the hardware, the software stacks that you need for that?
Because we are hosted by the University of York, we use a lot of their services, so we pay the University of York overheads. So a lot of the kind of hardware side of things is managed by them, if that answers the question. We did in the past, but we've now moved to virtual machines, so it's all by the university. So we had specific hardware in the past. Oh, the one thing we do pay for is hardware in our deep store, so we do pay for that ourselves.
So if there is no other question, I would say we thank the speakers again for the first